One of the things that we've spent a lot of time talking about the last two symposia from PIRC is really how we use phenotyping as part of the breeding enterprise in order to increase yields and efficiency within the field. That's obviously a clear necessity. We saw some of the numbers. I think Malcolm showed some nice slides earlier on. Malcolm Morrison showed some nice slides earlier on about the population growth and the amount of food that we would need. So we do tend to think quite a lot about the quantity side of things, but food security will never just be about quantity. We need to figure all of that out. But we could add, several trillion new calories into the whole food enterprise, and we still wouldn't have worldwide a healthy population. And so we did feel it was important to just talk a little bit while we are all together about the importance of nutritional quality. And nutritional quality really comes down to being a biochemical or a chemical phenotype in plants. Now, the best person that we could think of with whom we already work on this matter is Dr. Carol Henry. And Carol is an internationally recognized scholar and practitioner in the area of health promotion and food security. She's in the Department of Nutrition in the School of Pharmacy and Nutrition, and she's had a long history of international research programs that have focused one way or another on nutritional interventions that really will make a difference to large populations. I know she's going to talk at least about one that I've had the privilege of being a bit involved with in Ethiopia, where we've seen absolutely transformational changes in nutritional quality, which have then been reflected in specific measured results in these populations. And how you go about doing all of this is a lot more complicated than I thought, and a lot more complicated than most of us on the advisory board would have thought. But Carol has led programs of this nature extremely effectively, and so we're very proud to invite Carol to the stage today to talk about the importance not only of delivering the right amount of yield, but also delivering nutritional quality to the places of the world that really are desperately in need of that. Carol, it's great to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Maurice. So 20 or so years ago, two soil scientists, one from the University of Saskatchewan and one from Hawassa University in Ethiopia, met at a conference and said, we ought to do something. The soil in Ethiopia is poor. We need to see healthy soils, soils that would provide and yield food that are going to serve the millions of Ethiopians, but not just yield, but to also yield quality foods. And that then bore what I will talk a little bit about today, which was Pulse for Improved Sustainability. So we started out, as the soil scientists did, by looking at ways to increase soil fertility. And about 2009, the Canadian government, through Global Affairs Canada, suggested that it's great to increase yield, but we also need to look at quality, nutritional quality. And sorry, I have a cold, so you'll pardon me. But not only do we need to look at nutritional quality, it's always great that we do good food, and I really love the slides I saw this morning. But if no one eats it, we haven't done our job. So we need to not only have yield and great quality, and making sure, but we need to make sure that the foods that were produced are edible, tasty, and that someone is going to eat it. And that's what we call. So in 2009, we set as our target 70,000 Ethiopian farmers. And one way to think about that, as Rob Norris normally says, well, that represents twice the amount of farmers in Saskatchewan. And so that's the message we like to send. And we looked at not only male farmers, but female farmers, at children particularly under 5, because these are the vulnerable population, children under 5, women, and through the government extension systems, we were able to do many good things. We didn't do it alone as 2 universities, because we had several research organizations in Ethiopia, as well as else internationally, that worked with us. One of the papers that came out, and I'm told that one way that the group of nutritionists got the government of Ethiopia's attention was with this paper, because it talks about the cost of hunger. And it looked then at the productivity of Ethiopia. So children don't eat, okay. But then if they don't eat, then we're not looking at a productive society. So the cost of hunger made everybody stood up and say, it's time for us to do something. So why pulse? And I think most of us, I didn't see any on the plate today, chickpeas, lentils, beans. Well, we like them because they're a good source of minerals, a good source of protein, and they're a good source of other micronutrients. And also, they provide that limited amino acid called lysine, which when we put them together with cereal, then we've got a tasty product, but we also have a nutritious product, right? The other thing about pulse that makes it so easy, it's that it's easy to cook. It is also cheap, so most people, and in a country like Ethiopia, where most people feel that they can't afford meat, then pulse becomes a great alternative to ensure that children don't go to school hungry. But soil health is also very important, and I'll talk a little bit about intercropping, nitrogen fixation, and how pulse then increase the productivity of the soil and the fertility of the soil. This is Ethiopia, not the best map that you've seen, but this just gives us an opportunity to look at where we have worked. Because we started out with small project and then finally looked at the southern region of Ethiopia, and that's where most of our work was done. I like this slide, and probably Dr. Maurice Maloney should be proud, because this is one of his major contributions to one of our scientific advisor, because our project got so big that one person says you ought to have a timeline, Bob Tyler. And so if you really want to see the project, it looks this big and the different segments. But Maurice said more so that we ought to think of a way to look at the quality and the quantity and how they're integrated throughout the product. And this tells you that we started, of course, looking at seed delivery systems, both for home use, domestic, as well as for export. We looked at then, as we looked at those, alongside that, we were looking at adopting new technology, processing technologies. And so we're very fortunate because within the College of Agriculture and Bioresources, we didn't have to go too far. We had the soil scientists, the plant scientists, food and bioproduct, we've got the agricultural economics, and so we were able to work our way through that. And joining then the College of Pharmacy and Nutrition brought the concerns about the nutritional quality, improving diet diversity, and recognizing that one of the main issues why people might not eat pulse, even in this room, is that you lack the information about what to do with it. So female farmers tell me that, chickpeas, they went to the market and they've always seen chickpeas. They didn't know what to do with it until our team came together and taught them how to cook it. And then once they understand that, oh, not so bad. Some of us may even have heard of pulse being the poor man's food. Well, we don't say that anymore today because we know that it's low glycemic. We know that we're beginning to look at it in terms of coronary heart disease, in terms of addressing issues of obesity. So no longer is it a poor man's food. It actually is one that all of us ought to embrace. But we didn't stop there. As we look at that, we also had to look at not just improve nutritional status, but also improving income. Because especially for women, they needed to have income so they can buy the things within their homes, like that supplies for children, etc. So we looked at improving income, and we looked at that by household sales as well as look at commercial sales. We also looked at the value chain, and so Pulse additions for value chain was one of the things we also looked at. And we're also ever so fortunate that along the way as we go, we were able to add to our team. So no one person could do all of this. We were able to add to our team, and you'll notice that in those additions, we had radio broadcasting from Farm Radio International. We had the government of Ethiopia who came on board and said, you know what, we want to be a part of this, how can we help? So the Bureau of Agriculture, for example, began to supply seeds to people who needed them. One group that we saw, these ladies were outside of the catchment or study site. They heard the message from the radio, they spoke to the government, and the government brought them seeds. We also had the government, not just agriculture, but also the Ministry of Women, Youth and Children, who said, you know what, we can also contribute. Cooperatives that are going to bring women together so that working together, they may be able to do good for themselves, their household, and the community. So, what did we learn through all of that? Well, we found out that through the practices, agronomic practices, the best strains, fertilizers, and also through double cropping. And by double cropping, we mean that farmers were able to take the risk when they realized that pulse could be grown as a second crop. So you grow wheat, and after wheat, you could grow pulse. So it wasn't as much if they lost one, they were able. So we found at the end of it, those practices that we had yield up to 89%, which was much better than the local cultivars. Intercropping was another thing that gained the yield advantage, and you'll see there farmers who were standing around looking at that intercropping with wheat, with maize particularly, but with peppers. And if you've been to Ethiopia, you may know what I say when I say chat, which is one of the things that they intercropped with. So quite a bit of productivity from that. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cluster approach because I found that this was probably one of the best things we did, particularly for female farmers. And cluster approach means that most farmers in Ethiopia may have about 0.25 hectares of land. That's small. But if you brought 5 or 10 of those together, you could make a difference. one of the simple difference that made is that when you plant, you can't sleep because somebody may help reap it. But if there were 5 of you, you could take turns to take care of it. And so cluster meant that farmers, women, for example, could be part of the cluster, so they were working along men who would also help them. And that really, really offered a platform for peer learning and also for experience sharing. And I think it really, really opened a lot of doors for the farmers. Male farmers didn't like it as much. They said, why should we take 2 kilograms of seeds? That's not going to do that much for us. But as you notice, once they saw the benefit of it, they too got on board. So this was important because very much so, we wanted to improve the nutritional quality of the pulse-based products because we wanted to look at the groups. And if you notice on my slide, we started out by doing a nutrition assessment that showed us that there were issues in stunting, there were issues in low weight gain, particularly among children. And when you talk about diversity, it simply meant today we had such a diverse, such a lovely meal. In Ethiopia, particularly in some of the rural areas, a cup of cereal, maize, might be all they have for lunch or all they had all day. And if you know that maize is lacking in some of the amino acid, you know that's going to be a problem, right? So we went from needs assessment to talk about how do we develop those products that are going to be nutritious, that are going to be safe, and that people will totally enjoy. We also had to think about micronutrient bioavailability, because as you know, there are anti-nutrients with pulse, and we needed to address those. A lot of that research was done here at the University of Saskatchewan. And then we had to do the sensory evaluation for acceptance. And we did that in 2 ways. We did that here, at the University of Saskatchewan, but we took that message to Ethiopia because we know that the conditions there would be different. And it's good for us to like it, but what about the people who would have to eat it? And so we had nutrition education, we did feeding trials, and finally we scaled up to the 70,000 farmers. Thank you. Okay, and so I am not going to go through all of this, but simple to say this was one of the nutrition assessment outcome to show that the diets were not diverse at all. And it wasn't diverse because these people didn't like diversity. It simply was not diverse because they couldn't afford it. And so this was one of the extrude snacks that we made, and it's an interesting, this is one of the work of one of my PhD students that look at what combinations could we do of chickpeas and maize that would get people excited. And this particular product is being sold by one of our partners, Gus Arger, and it's being sold throughout the country. Here's an example of porridge. So most of us, when we talk of porridge, think of something else. Haricot beans, corn, wheat, and in some cases we add eggs if we did, kale if we did, and this was a simple porridge that was given to children as a complementary food. This is how we prepared it, pretty much using local equipment, because we knew that once this was going to be sustainable, then it had to be using the equipment and the procedures that the women understood. And here's the acceptability. And if you notice that, pretty much we found that once we made the porridge, the children particularly enjoyed it. And that was after several testing. This is sensory evaluation, consumer acceptance, and these are all work that has been done here at the University of Saskatchewan. One of the things we've done in capacity building is that Hawassa at the time did not have a nutrition program, so we brought nutrition, we trained the master student, we brought several of them here to do their PhD with the intent that they will go back and build those capacities. And I talked about behavioral change, communication approaches, a number of modes we had to use aside from teaching, food preparation, radio, visits to ensure that it was understood. And with those approaches, we found that children's weight went up, mothers' knowledge, attitude, and practice was increased, and those were increased even without giving them food. This was simply by them using the techniques we had shown them within their local capacity. This was a recent slide we did looking to see what the outcomes were and the effect on stunting, because stunting is one of the major indicators for nutritional status. So those were that. This is the business model, of course. We had to not only teach them how to eat it in the household level, we had to help these women so that they could sell. And those ladies in the green, Morris, remember the Likey women who not only had these bicycles that they were going door to door to sell the products and doing very well. We trained them, purchasing, finance, everything, and now they were going to, and now they say they want to set up their own business. Commercial successes are some of the things, and probably one of the things that we did was to talk about to the women about what were some of the success stories, and that would take me an hour. But one of the things that we learned from the women is not only did this help them in feeding their families, but it also improved their own decision-making power in the house. For you see, it's a patriarchal country, and one woman said before she had this, her husband sold pretty much most of the food that they grew. Now they're equal partners because she's able to grow, they're able to share that, how much to sell, how much to keep at home, and how much to keep for selling the next year. And so we do the 3-3-3, which is not only are you to eat it, but you ought to sell, and then you ought to keep some so that you have some for next year. So that we consider one of the great success story of the partnership between Ethiopia and Canada in helping to improve the nutritional status. But we haven't stopped there because Morris won't let us do. So he's forever telling us that there is that bigger picture. And so we're now looking at crop design for improved nutritional quality. And I have to admit, that is not my area of specialty, but we have Dr. Matthew Nosworthy, Matthew Wave, who has joined our team, and now he's excited, he's ready to work, and we're beginning to look at those qualities that are not only going to help us to feed the world, but do so in a sustainable way. And so this is where we are at this point. We're beginning. We know that protein, for example, that is increasing the protein has become one of the top trend in our countries these days. Since 2013, we've had about 30% of new products that are really featuring protein content claims, and about 25% of Americans are wanting to increase the quantity of protein in their diet. So I think as I listened this morning and yesterday to some of the presentation, we were busy taking notes as to where we fit. because it's not just about increasing the yield. We do need to think of the quality, and we do need to find sustainable ways to do that. So we're really, really excited about being a part of the broader conversation. And so Matthew provided the slides for me, which most people are already familiar with, that talk about breeding traits that might improve quality, and some of the other approaches that will do that. So, number of things that we're beginning to look at that we can now see ourselves as the Division of Nutrition being a part of that larger conversation, and moving again beyond basic nutrition to also collaborate with the National Research Council to have those conversations as well. So we're excited. We want to thank the Global Institute for Food Security to be part of that excitement, and also we would not have done that without the generous support of the Government of Canada. Thank you.